The ocean was black, except for the lanterns. Somewhere beyond the fog, something enormous moved beneath the water. The men packed into the tiny wooden boats stayed silent, gripping harpoons with freezing hands while waves slammed against the hull. Then the whale surfaced beside them, larger than the boat itself, breathing like an explosion into the night air. And for nearly 300 years, people willingly hunted these creatures across the oceans of the world. Not for sport, not mainly for food, but because entire civilizations depended on what was inside them. Before oil wells, before electricity, before modern fuel networks, whale oil lit streets, powered lamps, lubricated machinery, and fueled industries across Europe and America. Cities glowed at night because crews sailed into freezing oceans to hunt animals bigger than houses using wooden ships and hand-thrown spears. And the deeper the industry expanded, the more insane it became. By the early 1800s, whaling had transformed from coastal hunting into one of the most dangerous industries on Earth. The center of this empire was Nantucket, a small island off the coast of Massachusetts that became astonishingly wealthy from whale oil. Its harbor overflowed with ships preparing for voyages that could last 3 or even 4 years. Entire families depended on the trade. Merchants invested fortunes into ships, barrels, rope, iron harpoons, and crews willing to disappear into the Pacific or Arctic for years at a time. Young boys signed onto ships as teenagers, some never returned home. The ships themselves looked massive from shore. But once they entered open ocean, they became tiny drifting pieces of wood surrounded by storms, ice, and creatures powerful enough to destroy them. Life on board was miserable. The lower deck smelled of salt water, sweat, smoke, and rotting food. Sailors slept in cramped wooden bunks soaked with moisture, while rats crawled through storage compartments below. Fresh water spoiled. Disease spread quickly. Storms shattered sails and snapped masts. And every few weeks, crews faced the real danger: the hunt. Once a lookout spotted a whale spout on the horizon, the entire ship exploded into motion. Small rowboats were lowered into the water, carrying 6 or 7 men each. The harpooner stood at the front, while rowers pushed silently toward an animal that could weigh over 50 tons. Everything depended on getting close enough. The whale often had no idea the hunters were approaching until the final seconds. Then the harpooner launched the iron spear directly into its flesh. That was when the real chaos began. The wounded whale usually panicked instantly, diving or sprinting through the ocean while dragging the tiny boat behind it at terrifying speed. Sailors called it a Nantucket sleigh ride. The ropes attached to the harpoon screamed through the boat so violently they could tear limbs off if touched incorrectly. One mistake could kill everyone on board. Sometimes the whale dove deep enough to pull the boat nearly underwater. Sometimes the ropes tangled around sailors' legs and dragged them into the sea. Sometimes the whale flipped the boat completely, throwing men into freezing water hundreds of miles from land. And sometimes the whale fought back directly. The most famous example happened in 1820. The whaling ship Essex was hunting in the Pacific Ocean when crew members spotted an enormous sperm whale behaving strangely nearby. According to survivors, the whale suddenly charged the ship head-on, slamming into the wooden hull hard enough to shake the entire vessel. Then it attacked again. The second strike destroyed the Essex completely. The crew escaped into tiny boats carrying almost no food or water. What followed became one of the worst survival stories in maritime history. The sailors drifted across thousands of miles of open ocean under brutal sun and starvation conditions. Men died slowly from dehydration and exposure. Eventually, some survivors turned to cannibalism to stay alive. The disaster later inspired Herman Melville's Moby Dick. But even stories like Essex barely slowed the whaling industry. The profits were simply too enormous. A successful voyage could return carrying thousands of barrels of whale oil worth fortunes back home. One sperm whale alone could provide valuable spermaceti oil, considered one of the cleanest and brightest burning fuels of the era. Wealthy homes, factories, and city street lamps all depended on it, and whales provided more than oil. Whalebone, actually flexible baleen from certain whale species, became essential for fashion and manufacturing. It was used in corsets, umbrellas, brushes, buggy whips, fishing rods, and countless luxury products throughout Europe and America. The ocean had effectively become an industrial resource field. By the mid-1800s, American whaling fleets dominated global hunting operations. Hundreds of ships spread across the Atlantic, Pacific, and Arctic oceans. Crews hunted farther north into deadly ice fields, and farther south into remote waters where whales had never encountered humans before. Some voyages became nearly military in scale. Entire fleets operated together in dangerous regions packed with floating icebergs, freezing storms, and collapsing sea ice. Sailors sometimes spent winters trapped inside Arctic ice, waiting months for escape routes to reopen. Still, they kept hunting. Because demand kept growing. At its peak, The American whaling industry employed tens of thousands of workers and generated massive wealth for coastal cities like Nantucket and New Bedford. Some merchants became millionaires from whale oil, while sailors risked their lives for tiny shares of the profits, and the whales paid the price. Species like sperm whales, right whales, and bowhead whales were hunted so aggressively that populations collapsed across entire regions. In some oceans, sightings became dramatically rarer within only a few decades. The industry was becoming too effective. Then, almost overnight, its economic foundation collapsed. In 1859, everything changed after oil was discovered in Pennsylvania. Kerosene quickly proved cheaper, easier to produce, easier to transport, and far less dangerous than sending ships across the world to hunt whales manually. The transition happened shockingly fast. Within years, the massive whaling fleets that once dominated the oceans began shrinking. Ports that had grown rich from whale oil slowly declined. Shipyards closed, warehouses emptied. Many former whaling towns never fully recovered economically. And then came another disaster. In 1871, over 30 American whaling ships became trapped in Arctic ice near Alaska. Crews were forced to abandon the vessels entirely as the ice crushed and destroyed them. The event devastated the already declining industry. It never truly recovered afterward. By the early 1900s, industrial whaling still existed using steam-powered ships and explosive harpoons, but the old era of wooden ships and hand-thrown harpoons was fading away. The world no longer depended on whale oil, but the environmental damage remained. Some whale populations were pushed terrifyingly close to extinction. Certain species took generations to recover, and others still struggle today because of centuries of industrial hunting. And it's strange to think about now. For a huge part of human history, global industry literally depended on men climbing into tiny wooden boats and chasing monsters across freezing oceans by hand. Cities glowed because whales died. Fortunes were built from boiling blubber into oil. Empires of trade rose from lantern light burning inside homes that smelled faintly of the sea. And for centuries, humanity treated the largest creatures on Earth as fuel for civilization itself, until the modern world finally found something else to burn.